So, good morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me and there's not too much feedback. So I'm Chris Naylor. I'm the new chair of Finance and Improvement Scrutiny. And before we start, I have to do a quick note about live streaming. I need to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Please note also that all remote participants are muted at the outset of the meeting and are only able to speak at the invitation of the chair, probably with a bit of help from a colleague or two. Please, if you are wanting to speak, raise your virtual hand and then only unmute when the chair invites you to make your contribution. As chair, I may ask that you are muted if you do not participate in this way. Before we go into the main meeting, just a couple of points from me. One is to remind everyone and our guests who are joining us today, members of the public, that we are an advisory committee, we're not a decision-making committee. Many of the reports we're looking at today will be going to Cabinet on Wednesday, that's a couple of days' time, for decision. And it's our job to look at those reports as scrutiny, to look at the governance, to look at the process, and to look at the finance. And that is basically our focus. So that is hopefully how we'll go through today. And secondly, to say, this of course is a meeting in public, as I understand it, not a public meeting. We're not expecting audience to get involved, but we're very happy for audience to be looking at how we're handling the meeting and how we come to the conclusions we do. If this committee decides it wants to make representations to Cabinet on any of the items we're discussing, then I will be briefed by the committee to pass those comments on. But we will have to see how the committee feels as we go through the agenda. That's all I wanted to say. So I'm going to head into the main agenda now. Firstly, apologies. We have apologies from Charles Shackley-Bennett, who can't be with us, and substituted by Brendan. Where's Brendan? Oh, there. Hi. Thank you for coming. And secondly, on that point, we may have a number of members of the committee having to leave around 12-ish, I believe, but we will do our best to crack on. Disclosable pecuniary interests. I've had none as such mentioned, but Malcolm, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is in relation to agenda item number 9. So between January and June 2024, I worked on a 6-month fixed-term contract for PwC. Obviously, this was before I became a Shropshire councillor. At the time, I was aware of the work they were doing here, and I knew some people, but I had no direct or indirect role in that contract. So I'm happy to take advice whether I'm able to contribute towards agenda item 9 or not.
It's historical, isn't it? It's not going to impact you moving forward.
Thank you, Tim and Malcolm. Personally, I thought important to get that clear, but it didn't seem to be an interest which might obstruct your joining in the discussion. Okay, going on, minutes. The minutes have been circulated from 13th of April and 14th of May. Anything anybody would want to raise regarding those, or are you happy that I approve those as true record? Okay, thank you. We've approved those. Thank you very much. Public questions. We have 2. And John, you're here, aren't you, to ask the first of those? Can you find a microphone somewhere, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the Organisational Transformation Lessons Learned Review. In the responding to the lessons learned grid at paragraph 5.1 of the Council's report, It states at the end of the last box that several facets of the PwC proposed savings are being pursued through the digital programme. In item 3.8 of the independent local partnerships report, it says a substantial amount of the money paid to the transformation partner, PwC, circa £7.4 million, has been for work on digitising customer channels. It is undoubtedly the case at this point the programme is perceived to have delivered far less than was intended. Has the Chair a curiosity in seeking transparent, public, further detailing of what the facets of PwC's proposed savings being pursued through the digital programme are?
Discussing this with officers, my response is as follows. As Chair, I am, of course, both curious and keen that the committee maintains clear and transparent oversight of the Council's transformation activity as it moves forward, and will expect further details of the transformation programme to be presented in due course to this committee. The reference to facets of previous proposed savings being considered through the digital transformation programme as it prioritises its projects reflects how earlier recommendations and learning are now informing current prioritisation and planned delivery. Digital is, of course, a key enabler for a lot of the transformation proposed in the Council. There are currently more than 150 proposed projects, digital projects, being reviewed by the Digital Transformation Board. These are a combination of projects from service areas, what is considered best practice from other councils, and some of the previous proposed savings from PwC. The teams are using a prioritisation framework to prioritise those that the Council should take forward as part of its digital transformation programme. This will include elements of children and adults services, where, of course, there's a major expenditure, and the digital transformation there will help include the ways our residents can access services and information. Thank you, John. Who's? Jill's reading, okay. We've got a second question from, whoops.
Marianne.
Oh, that's where it is. From Marianne, but I believe Jill is going to be reading that. Jill, do come forward and take the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Jill George speaking on behalf of the Helena Lane Daycare Alliance, and just by way of brief explanation, the Daycare Alliance is a group of service users, carers and family members at the daycare service, and I've had the privilege of providing some support to that group over the last few months. The question, and this is on behalf of the group as a whole, and it reflects the feelings of users and carers in particular. The Council's pursuit of financial sustainability does not absolve it of its responsibilities around good governance. Does the Finance and Improvement Overview and Scrutiny Committee have assurance of good governance around fundamental issues, including the Council's statutory duties under the Equality Act 2010 and the Freedom of Information Act 2000? Also, that public involvement and consultation have always been meaningful and consistent with the gunning principles. Thank you.
Jill, thank you very much. And it feels a long time since I think we were in the same room fighting for Bishop's Castle and pushing a bed round the countryside. But I think we won on that. So the response I'm giving you is really to refer us to what we're going to be discussing later. As chair, I very much appreciate your making contact regarding the Helena Lane reports following the publication of the Scrutiny and Cabinet agendas. I completely understand your concern about this provision and the future options being put to Cabinet. It's naturally our job as Scrutiny to consider whether due process had been followed and any learning captured, and of course the financial details. I offer apologies, as I did in my email to Marianne, on behalf of the Council for the late posting of the Scrutiny reports, which I know officers have been working hard to finalise, and appreciate your swift response. In view of this, I gave special permission for you, and this is referring to Marianne, to submit a short statement about Helena Lane, and that has been circulated around the members of the committee. Thank you then for the points you have raised. We will ensure that these areas are all kept in mind during our review of the proposals being presented later. In terms of your question regarding the financial workings, I'm sure officers will address that point in their presentation to the committee. Thank you. Then moving on to member questions. I believe we have just the one question from Councillor Clayton, but being read for us today by Councillor Mallon.
Thank you, Chair. Why were the financial pressures within adult social care not fully reflected in the original budget setting process? And what specific assumptions were made at that time, which have since proven inaccurate? In light of the recurring nature of these pressures, can a clear explanation be provided as to why they were not anticipated? And what concrete changes have been made to the budget setting methodology to ensure that these costs are properly and transparently accounted for in future years, rather than repeatedly emerging as in-year pressures? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that. And of course, it goes to the heart of what our council is grappling with as we go forward. For a number of years, local government has faced extremely challenging budget pressures arising from a number of issues that are including, but without exclusion, significant and increasing demands for statutory children's and adult social care services arising from a number of specific factors, including an ageing population, post-COVID issues including mental health, NHS pressures, inspection standards, new burdens, etc. Other new burdens, especially arising from cost of living crises, fuel prices, etc. Ongoing annual real terms reduction in government funding and loss of some grants. Inflation and interest rate pressures in excess of government forecasts, consider in context of capped council tax and some price pressures for local government commissions that have exceeded standard CPI levels. Council tax capping, absence of sustainable planning. And as you can tell, I'm reading from a bulleted list and you'll be able to see that subsequently. In these circumstances, and given the statutory requirement to set a balanced budget each year, the Council have previously committed to savings that have not been achievable, not least in 2024-25 and 2025-26. As part of these savings programmes, there have been some rather optimistic estimates of transformation in terms of scale and timing. Additionally, costs have been incurred against a voluntary redundancy scheme, which may have inadvertently impacted on staff capacity, including the capacity required to deliver changes in service delivery and change. I'm reading this fast because it's quite a long reply, I'm afraid. Forecasting of future growth will have been recognised over recent years when both monitoring and setting budgets. The impacts of future growth needed to be accounted for, albeit that these projections will have been unpredictable, a national challenge, especially for children's and adult social care. In setting a legally balanced budget, the projections of savings seem to have offset any growth considerations and, notwithstanding formal council approval to the budgets, the framework has underachieved in terms of setting accountability for service directors required to operate within an unachievable budget. Moving forward, it is important to note that the last quarter of the 2025-26 financial year has seen less deviation than in previous years and indeed previous quarters. Nonetheless, the Chief Executive has instigated a special investigation of all end-of-year movements in the forecast outturn, which we're coming to in a few minutes, to confirm the adequacy of controls and checks in the calculation of those projections. You'll be relieved to hear, last paragraph, a new budget framework is being set out in line with the Council's improvement plan, and these will be set out in the NTFP medium-term financial programme report to Cabinet in July. Importantly, this includes the need to ensure that service directors are able to formally sign off on budget variations and to express a risk-based opinion on these, plans being realistic at a practical level for any saving plans and openness and transparency of these. And we'll be picking up some of those points in the first 2 or 3 agenda items as we go forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brendan. Moving on, we come to our first item, which of course is the financial outturn paper for 25-26. And who have we got presenting?
I think that's me, Chair.
Hello. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. I'll give you. I'm sorry I can't be with you this morning, but I needed to be elsewhere. I will briefly introduce the report, if I may, but I'll happily, of course, take any questions on it. This has been an incredibly turbulent year for Shropshire, as I'm sure you all know, and this report is reporting an adverse variation on the draft budget. I'll explain why I call it an adverse variation in a moment, but an adverse variation on the budget of something approaching 50 million. We've financed that largely through reserves, but also through a significant government contribution called exceptional financial support, which the council sought approval for following the announcement of the financial emergency last autumn. The exceptional financial support is the last resort, really, in terms of enabling us to balance that budget for last financial year. And of course, we're using exceptional financial support again in 26/7, given the structural deficit that had been created over a number of years in the council's base budget, and particularly you will note adults and children's social care are particularly fragile areas. Savings targets have been massively underachieved in 25/6, and again that is reflected in the adverse variation. I call it an adverse variation because there is no way I can personally and professionally see how the savings that were baked into the 25/6 budget in February 25 were ever realistically achievable. There were clearly expectations around transformation plans that may well be realistic in the longer terms, but were certainly not realistic in the timescales that budget expected. I'll probably close it there, Chair, if I may, and I say happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you very much. And I'm sure there will be a few questions coming. But can I just say, reading that through myself, the outturn report, which took some time, I must say I was hugely impressed by the scale and the kind of depth and the detail in that. So it's a major piece of work, which I'm sure we've all read carefully and want to comment on. But also, of course, the amount of red showing up there, regrettably, reflecting your point about the mismatch between budget and savings expectations. Hopefully for 26-27 year, with a more realistic budget to work to, there'll be a lot more green and rather less red. We hope.
We hope.
Any particular questions? I can see Bernie, Dawn, anyone else at the moment? Bernie, go on, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is clearly a huge document to produce, and thank you to all the officers and Duncan Whitfield for producing this, and covers a huge range of services, some of which are still difficult in terms of the achievement of financial stability going forward. And so I may ask in general that for future such complex reports, that this committee has a briefing, an in-depth briefing, to more deeply understand some of the complex issues prior to this committee actually sitting, so that we can actually focus on important areas for both scrutiny, but also to inform the improvements, to help inform the improvements that are planned by the council. This is, I believe, a vital part of the overview and scrutiny work.
Thank you, Bernie. And just staying with that for a second, are we generally of interest in exploring that option? It seems to me an attractive option to have an informal briefing of the kind that Bernie's outlined to us, but obviously it will depend on staff time and timetables and so on. But are you happy that we, after this meeting, explore that further? Yes? Thank you. There's Dawn and Rosemary, please.
Thank you, Chair. As Duncan has said, it's a very challenging position that we find ourselves in. Now, while the late year stabilisation is welcome, the report also points to deeper structural weaknesses in budget setting, savings delivery, demand forecasting, financial governance, and these possible limitations may affect the credibility of recovery plans. I'm just going to focus on three key things. Adult social care remains the largest pressure area and should be where the majority of our focus is, with well over £23 million overspend and very large pressures in spot purchasing and block purchasing. I ask, was this overspend a result of temporary market conditions, persistent under-budgeting, weak demand modelling, delayed operational intervention, or a combination of all three? And what is, or what has been done to ensure that this situation doesn't happen again this year? With children's services, this continues to show a serious overspend, especially in external residential placements. Although the number of children looked after fell by 7.5%, spending still rose sharply. So, why did costs continue to escalate despite a reduction in the number of children being looked after? And what is the current strategy to reduce reliance on high-cost external placements? And this will actually pick up on some of the response that you gave to Brendan's question there. But several underspends appear to arise from vacancy management, delayed recruitment, capitalisation of posts and things, or other slippage rather than genuine recurrent efficiencies. So I have some significant concerns around this area. Millions of savings have been reported as being made as a result of redundancies and staff leaving and not being replaced. But this raises a number of questions I'd appreciate answers to. Firstly, how much did the redundancy programme cost us from its inception to when it was recently stopped? How much was this projected to save us on a per annum basis? Given the considerable upfront costs of redundancy programmes and the cost reductions that only accrue over a period of years, when was the projected return on investment expected to be achieved? How much has not replacing staff who've left saved us per annum, and have the impacts this has had on service provision to residents actually been assessed? We know it's a problem, but has there actually been an assessment? So given that these programmes have left us seriously under capacity in many, if not all areas, unable to make necessary service improvements, and therefore we are now having to recruit many new staff, I'm afraid I have a couple more questions here. What is the projected cost of this recruitment, both this and next financial year? What are the projected gross employment costs of these new staff? How many agency workers will be necessary to fill the gap short term whilst we go through a recruitment process? How long will these agency workers be used, and at what cost to the council? Now, overall, I believe that we need this information because there is a significant danger here that we initially made a projected saving of, and I don't know the numbers, so let's pick some figures out of thin air, of say 5 million per annum at an initial cost of say 20 million because of all the costs of redundancy, etc. Meaning that there was a 4-year payback period until true ongoing savings were realised. But actually, as we haven't yet reached that 4-year payback period and are now having to recruit back many staff and suffer higher short-term costs of immediate use of agency staff, we have in fact potentially made no savings at all. That's bad enough, but the impacts of reduced service levels are experienced by our residents every day, who are paying more for less every year. And this is, if my assessment is anywhere near accurate, you know, there needs to be some very significant lessons learnt by this council, and ones never to be repeated. Thank you.
Dawn, thank you very much. I think some of those questions are slightly more focused on the future and less focused on last year's outturn. And of course, that's very reasonable. And I'm sure Cabinet colleagues will be thinking in that forward-looking context as well. Rosemary, do you mind if Duncan picks up those questions? Now, Duncan, you've got a very long list of questions there. Perhaps you can pick off the ones that you can answer swiftly now, and maybe pick up the others in writing in due course if that's easier.
Thanks, Chair. I'll give that a go. Thank you for those questions, Dawn. And it kind of demonstrates, I think, Bernie's point about how useful it would be to have a fuller briefing in advance of the committee itself in order to work through some of these. If you could please just let me have in writing that full set, because there's far too much for me to go through this morning, but I'll try and get back to you with responses. In terms of some big issues coming out of what you have been saying there, firstly, adult services is, as we know, a pressure from a cost point of view across the country, being driven by demand and complexity of an ageing population, and no more so than in Shropshire, where our problem, I think, is exaggerated to some extent by the geography of the county. The blunt answer to your question is that growth has not been allowed for within that service, which really, over the last at least 2 years, and probably further back than that, which defies belief, really, given the knowledge in the sector of this adult social care pressure, which cannot simply be offset by savings. There are only so many ways that you can look after an old person, and no, there's no way that is cheap. In the children's sector, you mentioned residential care. That's a typical example of what I referred to. Oh, sorry, what was referred to in a response from the chair to a question earlier. Residential care placements, the price of those services have been rising way above CPI, and you have cases now, as I'm sure you know, where you're paying £750,000, £1 million a year for some children in residential care with very, very special needs. So there is a factor in there where price loaded on to increase volume. Those volumes, particularly, I think, are evidence as rising through and beyond the COVID period, are very critical. I'll have to get back to you with the figures on costs of redundancy, but it is no doubt linked in some way to the capacity point that you're raising as well, even though in 26/7 we have applied quite significant numbers into the budget to rebuild the capacity that had been taken away by a combination of voluntary redundancy and unachievable savings. The recruitment and the retention of specialist staff, accountants, lawyers, social workers, planners, the list goes on. It's a very, very tight market at the moment, and that is, I think, one of our biggest limitations in terms of pushing forward with more change. Finally, in terms of those, a lot of the concerns that you expressed there, Dawn, and moving forward in the medium-term financial plan in July Cabinet, that no doubt will be looked at by the Scrutiny Committee as well, you will see a new approach to the budget framework, how we set budgets, how we create plans to set aside alongside savings, so that we know that we have we know what the risk is involved in achieving them. And clearly the very clear instruction from our chief executive is that we don't apply unachievable savings, and every saving that we do actually apply needs a plan set aside alongside it. So you'll read more in the MTFP, I think, about the future in July. Can I just add, again, trying to moderate some of those concerns, I guess. We've certainly seen stabilisation in the last quarter of the year in terms of our forecast outturn. We have £54,000 out in our forecast from period 11 to period 12, which is certainly far better place than we've been in previous years. So that is encouraging. Also in 25/6, we've called down from exceptional financial support something like 9.6 million less than we had anticipated back in, I think, December. The number was landed, and we're working towards an MTFP, which also will give us a lower target for EFS in 26/7 and 27/8 than we actually applied for to MHCLG previously. So sorry, Dawn, that's not dealing, I think, with a lot of the specifics to your questions. But
thank you, Duncan. And I think we need to move on to quick little points from me. One is echoing Dawn's concern about the financial pressures from adult and children's social care, that this committee would, I'm sure, want to look at future strategy on that, particularly around the cost management and risk issues there, which are identified here and Dawn has reminded us of. The second thing is I was going to flag up 2.11, that reduction in the EFS drawdown from 71.4 to 61.7, which you mentioned, and I think the organisation at all levels needs to get some credit for that. Thank you. Rosemary.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good lead-in for me. Thank you, Chris. So looking at the EFS, I'm going to limit myself to very simple questions, Duncan. Looking at the EFS, on the face of it, 9.5 million saved from what we expected to borrow back in, to ask the government to borrow back in November, is great. But basically, that's a 2 million improvement on the outturn position compared to what was projected at that point, from 21.5 million over to 19.6 million. So that gives us 2 million. We've got 10 million for transformation, which I think is transformation going forward, but I worry about whether 7.4 million paid to PwC for transformation is, whether that's involved in eating up most of that. But then the largest majority of the money saved comes from switching some of the 39.9 million Northwest Relief failed project, Northwest Relief Road failed project, to remove the Oxon Link Road part of it. So that reduces that down to 32 million. So those are kind of almost semantics, really, aren't they, that have given us that 7 of the 9 million.
Thank you, Rosemary. Duncan, comments, please.
Rosemary, I think you've read the report accurately. It's a fair representation of what has happened, but I think one reflects the prudence. Is that the prudent way in which the EFS proposal was put into government, and clearly we did not want to be left short in terms of the ultimate ending of the Northwest Relief Road project. So it's good that we've not had to expend that. That's worth to us in 26/7 about £900,000 a year, that 9.6 reduction in what we've actually called down, and also that will flow through into future years as well. I wouldn't sit here and celebrate it overly, Rosemary, I don't think, but it is an indication, I think, that we do have more structure over in a very, very difficult situation in which we find ourselves.
Thank you, Duncan. Bernie?
Thank you, Chair. Having raised a point about the briefing, I think some of these questions are very, very pertinent in relation to that question. But looking at a specific item, the care and well-being section occupies about half of the overspend, and section 4.2 in the explanation discusses the issues of cost of care transferring from the NHS to the local authority in year, and I'm aware that there is often a discussion and sometimes difficult discussion about application of the Better Care Fund and Continuing Healthcare Fund. And in some areas, in some authorities, these funds have been combined to reduce the friction that can occur between the NHS and the local authority in administering these funds, which are important. But not only does it result in unplanned pressures in year, but it also results in officers and other people who work for the two organisations being involved in sometimes difficult and occasionally confrontational discussions about who pays for what, which I would have hoped in the 21st century we would be beyond. Thank you.
Duncan, I don't know if you've got any comment on that or whether it's really for another department.
I think it's really primarily a question for adults and indeed children's, because the same discussions that Bernie set out there happen in both quarters. But one thing I would say is the NHS is a critical part of the resolution of the pressure that local government is facing in adults, and it's a relationship that has to be kept very finely tuned and work for both sides. That does lead to difficult conversations.
Thank you, Duncan. Tanya, did you want to come in and comment? Thank you.
So Tanya Mars, Chief Exec, Shropshire Council. We would really welcome further key lines of inquiry for both adults and children's transformation. So this Wednesday, we've got the Children's Social Care Transformation report coming to Cabinet. I would propose, Chair, if I may, perhaps a future item for this committee would be the success of the outcomes for that maybe in 6 months' time, and then the adult transformation paper is going to Cabinet in September. So you may wish to consider both of those items in a future forward plan. With regards to continuing healthcare and how the local authority and the ICB work together, you may want to consider either a HOSC item, referring that to HOSC or to People's Committee, just in terms of balancing out your forward plan.
Thank you, Tanya. Any views on that round the table? And Bernie's made a very important point. It's a key transition area and an expenditure area, obviously. Tanya's suggesting those couple of papers which could come to this committee in due course. I think we'd be very happy about that, but we don't want to take on too much, and it may be that HOSC can pick up one of those. But Bernie, perhaps we discuss that separately afterwards.
Thank you, Chair, but it is nevertheless half of the overspend.
Absolutely, but that's a critical point, and we need to very much keep our eye on it going forward. We need to move on, if we may, and I haven't heard any, I don't think, comments suggesting that there's anything tricky about or questions to be raised about the process on this and the kind of quality of the work that's going on there. Our concerns are more about overall budgetary issues and trends, I think. So I think I would say that we're fairly content with the report as such. And personally, I would say more than content, very impressed. And there is a figure in there somewhere, and I think also in the improvement papers, about us moving from a situation where only 40% of local spending within the council was being actively monitored to now 95%. And that's got to be a good thing, obviously, for us to be managing our finances all that much better. Is there anything else that colleagues around the table want me to be taking to Cabinet? I was about to say next week, but it's Wednesday. I think that's been a very helpful discussion. Thank you, and has picked up some areas for us to be looking at going forward and some items for the agenda. Thank you very much, Duncan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Moving on, if we may. Okay, sorry, yes. So are we agreed with the recommendation as set out? 3.1. Tim has just reminded me.
Just to be, I think you covered it.
Everybody happy? We consider this report and the recommendations made to Cabinet and comment as appropriate. Well, I think we've done all that. Thank you. Good. All right, moving on to the improvement. Are we on to the, we're on to the Q4 performance report. Sorry. Yeah. And Paul, are you speaking to that for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For those who don't know me, I'm Paul Clark, the Service Director for Strategy and Change here at Shropshire Council. This is, Chair, the regular quarterly performance monitoring report that is presented to both Scrutiny and Cabinet. The paper this time around looks slightly different to the previous 3 quarterly papers, not least because it's the year end, but also it not only presents the Q4 position, but it also introduces a performance framework aligned to the new corporate plan. So a report of 2 halves. Starting with the Q4 performance position, so in the last quarter of 25-26 financial year, so the period January to March 26, a total of 36 key performance indicators have been updated in the dashboard. There's a link to the dashboard in the report as per previous and normal practice. 5 of those KPIs are grey, which mean they don't have a target set for various reasons, and there's a table explaining that in the report. So in terms of the headlines for that Q4 performance position, the 31 key performance indicators with targets, 71% above target, 6% similar to the target, and 23%, which accounts for 7 KPIs, are below their target in Q4, so showing as exceptions, those shaded red, in other words, and detail on each of those 7 KPIs, the reasons, the explanations for that below target performance are summarised in Appendix 1 to the report. So in terms of that overall summary position for Q4 performance against the Shropshire Plan, 77% of indicators above or similar to the target, compared to 72% last quarter, so marginal improvement. The full suite of KPIs, there's 80 plus of them, can be viewed in the supporting dashboard, and as I've already mentioned, there's a link to that within the report. So that's a look back at Q4 performance. In terms of looking forward and the performance framework that's going to support the delivery of our new corporate plan, which was approved by full council last month. That is essentially set out in paragraph 4.7, explaining that the framework is going to consist, as you would expect, of a set of KPIs, key performance indicators, to demonstrate the outcomes we're trying to improve and the things we're trying to impact. A set of specific and measurable things the council plans to develop, deliver or decide during 26-27, what we're calling delivery commitments, which will help demonstrate delivery and decision making aligned to that corporate plan. And then the third element of that framework is an annual review of those delivery commitments, including associated KPIs, ensuring that what we are committing to deliver aligns to our financial sustainability current position is all budgeted for. It's important, I think, for the committee to note that list of commitments in the framework, not intended to be an exhaustive list of everything the council does. A quarterly report to, as I mentioned, both Scrutiny and Cabinet will allow us to reference things that sit outside of that list. We're also committing to an annual review report summarising delivery and performance against the corporate plan, ensuring a more rounded way of reporting, but also increasing the opportunities to debate and discuss delivery against our corporate plan. I'll pause there, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Very helpful. And Claire here has just reminded me we need to have in mind the recommendations 3.1, 3.2. Any queries and comments around the table? We have Dawn, we have Brendan, we have Bernie, and I should remind you that because some members of the committee will be leaving 12ish, we need to keep pressing on if we may. So Dawn first.
Thank you. Things are definitely better on process across the board, so that is something welcome to see. But I still have concerns over what I'm seeing as, personally, as an overly optimistic slant that's being put onto things. This report presents a more positive picture than the underlying narrative fully justifies, I feel. It shows that 77% of updated KPIs are at or above target, but that headline is flattered by the design of the framework, the limited number of indicators updated this quarter, the exclusion of financial metrics from the reported headline, and the use of indicators that do not directly reflect residents' lived experience. It feels more like positive spin statement than a true reflection of the challenging reality that we are in. I'm going to focus on a couple of areas. So, as I say, I think that the financial reality is being underplayed. The Council remains in a declared financial emergency. Yet there's still no integrated presentation. I know you talk about a report in two halves, but, you know, for all of our benefit, this pulling it together into one place so that it is easy for us to see what is happening, how we can challenge it, you know, I think there's some more work. I know you've done bucket loads of work, Paul, but if there is some way that you can pull this overall, like an executive summary together, so that it's really clear for us and residents to be able to see it, it would really help. Important service pressures remain despite improvement. So the EHCP timeliness improved from 13 to 26%, but this is still only around half the already very modest 50% target and far from acceptable statutory performance. Some targets appear weak. For example, a 50% target for EHCP timeliness is low for a statutory duty, while a 100% FOI target is legally correct, but the report does not explain the size of the backlog, only the response rate. Now, I know I've asked previously, can we have the real numbers as well, so we actually can see the challenge? You know, how if you've got thousands coming in and it's lower, then, you know, that's easier for everybody to understand, a lower return rate than if we've got 20 and it's really poor. Some important resident-facing issues are missing or insufficiently prominent. And here we're going to go, right, there is very little on highways conditions. Potholes, these are the issues of greatest importance to the greatest number of our residents. Roads and rubbish are what residents care most about, most of the time. I know, because that's what I'm spending most of my life on. These should be front and centre if this is to be a resident-centred document, as I've been told it is. Important KPIs are worsening or newly deteriorating. Just picking out one, this one upset me. School readiness for children eligible for free school meals has worsened, falling from 47.1% to 43.7%. These points, which points to deepening inequality. Less than 44% of this cohort of children are actually ready for school. What on earth will this do to their life chances? So this report is useful as a high-level dashboard summary, but I don't feel it is on its own a sufficiently reliable reflection of the Council's overall condition. It does identify real operational issues and some genuine improvements which are to be recognised, but it also smooths over the seriousness of the Council's position in three ways. It does not Firstly, it does not integrate performance data with the Council's financial emergency in a way that allows members to judge exactly which service improvements are affordable and sustainable. Can this be done? Secondly, several of the most serious red indicators are statutory, high-risk or resident-facing issues, meaning their importance is greater and I feel should be more prominent. And thirdly, the report is directionally useful, but does not provide a clear single point of reference, because I read all of these, it would be lovely to have just one, for members or residents to assess whether the Council is genuinely improving service delivery and its financial position. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Brendan, have you got similar points to raise, or?
I have a different point to raise.
Okay. But let's let Paul have a chance to come back now. I mean, one of the challenges there, of course, is it's a highly complex organisation dealing across a huge range of different areas of sometimes hard to quantify activities amidst the challenges we all know about the financial situation. So how easily we can expect answers to your questions, Dawn, much as we would want them. I'm not quite sure, but Paul, do you want to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Dawn, for those observations, questions and challenges. I can't pick up on all of them at this moment in time, but I'm very happy to commit to a conversation outside of this meeting to pick up on some of the more detailed points. What I would say, Dawn, is many of your observations on the current performance framework are being picked up in the design and the rollout of the new one, and I hope that you will see that over the next few weeks and months. The framework is specifically aligned to the corporate plan, so it's trying to help us demonstrate, measure, report and delivery against those priority ambitions rather than necessarily every facet of service performance, which is probably more of a focus for the individual scrutiny committees, I would suggest. I'll pause there, Chair, to pick up some other questions, but very happy to pick up a conversation with Dawn about some of the more detailed points.
Thank you very much, Paul. And yeah, yes, Heather, would you like to come in?
I would, and I think actually I'd just like to underline that actually this is looking back at the previous corporate plan, the Shropshire plan as it was, and all of that. And then it is in two halves because we're moving into the new corporate plan, which will have different, will have an action plan, which will be coming to Cabinet, which will have new KPIs, will be much more usable. And already we have links to a dashboard so we can actually look at all of those things. I think what you've just underlined, Dawn, is our problem with capacity. That actually trying to recruit is really difficult at the present time, which is what you heard Duncan say. And we can improve lots and lots of things when we have enough staff, but until we've managed to recruit with the money we actually have, then much of that is reduced. This is really difficult for this organisation. I didn't come into politics to make life difficult for everybody, but actually the financial position we're in is reflected in some of the things we see here. 77% being good or average is not good enough, but we can only do what we can do with the staff we actually have, and we are working really hard to make sure we have a better structure and we have the better capacity of officers at a lower level to make sure we can do everything we need to do. And yes, the KPIs for the future are vitally important alongside the way the budget is embedded, but performance will always follow where we are financially and where we are organisationally. So I am looking forward to you being able to be positive about changes for the coming year, because we're still working under a budget and the Shropshire plan for the last year. We will now be moving into hopefully a better world.
Thank you, Leader Heather. Thank you very much. And I would be failing in my duty as Chair if I wasn't pushing us along. So, Councillor Mallin, Councillor Bentinck, Councillor Groves, please.
Thank you, Chair. KPIs are quite contentious, really. Certainly in the past, they've not been well handled in other organisations, because generally the temptation is to set a KPI for something that's easy to measure and something you're likely to achieve, and then you can show good progress. Obviously, we're not trying to do that here, but one area, and you're welcome to a collective groan, because I'm going to talk about paragraph 7, the climate change appraisal. That does raise questions about how the KPIs are being handled for that. Because really, we've been talking already about being outcomes based, but as far as I can see from the KPIs I've looked at, they're all changes to inputs, so changes to carbon emissions on behalf of the council, highways, the local economy and individuals. But those are changes of inputs in line with global changes of inputs to create a final output, which is less CO2 in the atmosphere, a lower temperature by 2100. But we're talking here about implications for healthy people, healthy economy and a healthy organisation. There's your outcomes. You want to make the county healthier through these changes of inputs to a system. But we don't have any KPIs for that. We're not measuring performance. We don't know what good looks like in terms of reducing carbon. So I wrote a lot more here, but you do want to move things along here. Fundamentally, emissions since we started measuring in 1958 have been like a straight line up. They've never changed trajectory. Even in 2020, which is the only year where we've had a dip in emissions, because of the lockdowns, it still went up unabated. So are we going to be measuring that? Are we going to be in a more global context for global results? Because the outcome for Shropshire is achieved through a global outcome of less CO2 and hopefully less temperature in the future. So can we see the KPIs tuned to that? Because at the moment we're not really measuring any outcomes whatsoever.
Thanks very much. Very good point. And Paul, can you have that on a list to comment on once we've had our other colleagues come in? Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very grateful for the detail that's provided in the Q4 report and the visual representation on of the numbers, the graphs, and the RAG rating. Noting that in the last quarter there was an actual reduction in the 5-year housing supply, I would hope and expect that for this quarter, when it becomes available, that will increase. But I'd like to confine my particular questions with regard to section 4.3, healthy people. Recognising that most of the KPIs have been achieved, it does draw attention to those in red in particular. And the one I'd like to concentrate on is the proportion of children with free school meal status achieving a good level of development at the end of reception, which Councillor Husman has also alluded to. If 68% of children overall in Shropshire achieve this, then if we are trying to drive out inequalities, should that not be the target for those achieving school meal status? And so what I'd like to ask is, what is in place to restore the percentage of people reaching a good level of development at the end of reception, particularly as the National Neighbourhood implementation programme is being implemented in this and for the next 2 financial years, with significant increased government funding to achieve that. And my estimation, which I reported at the Joint HOSC previously, is that in this financial year it should be of the region, or in the region of £60 million, but has not been publicly declared as far as I understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. Gary, and then Ed, please.
Yeah, just a couple of points, minor points, Chair. Dawn raised some valid points which Paul couldn't answer right now, and he said he's happy to have a conversation with her outside of this. Yeah, great. But as you said right at the start, we need to make sure the other councillors who are not on this committee understand what we're doing. If Paul's having a conversation with Dawn about Dawn's questions, we don't know the answers to that. So we need some feedback as well on the answers, what you're going to give Dawn at a later date, which I understand you're not going to have them off the top of your head, you know, and things like that, but the rest of us are interested in the answers to that. And the other one, what Brendan was saying about KPIs, never mind from committee to committee, from report to report, the KPIs are presented to us in a different way each time. Now, on the previous report, if you look through that and you scrutinise it, are underspends in brackets or are they overspends? And it's not consistent. You know, one's an underspend and it's in brackets, one's an underspend, it's not in brackets, and you think, well, what are we doing here? And then you've got an overspend that's in green, an underspend that's in yellow. We need this consistency across all reports, and it'd be much easier then to understand. Because the vast majority of us look at a table, we look at the KPIs, and we think, right, never mind the greens, we're happy with the greens. Let's have a look at the reds and the ambers. But then you look at an amber and you think, that's an underspend. I better check the greens. Hey, up, we've had an overspend there. So we need this consistency as well.
Great, great. Very good points, Gary. Thank you. And Ed?
Thank you, Chair. So first, positive.
Turn on the microphone, Ed.
Sorry?
You need to just press the button so it lights up. Oh, is it? It's not from my end, sorry.
I mean, showing great users on it.
Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you very much. Do you know what, I had trouble with the full council meeting. I had to borrow someone.
Just you, Ed.
Okay. Yeah, so first thing is, thank you, Chair. First thing is positive. I like the dashboard, actually, great, very good. A couple of things I would say on this performance report, though, is that I understand this is a large and complex organisation, and so that there are going to be a lot of indicators. However, some of them are nice to have indicators, and if we don't achieve them. It's a shame, but so what? The world's not going to end. Others are critical, and so I think it's important that we differentiate between those. If we're going to get lost in. So if we're achieving 75%, great, but the 25% that we're not achieving, the actual important ones. A better measure is if we can also indicate the severity of failure. If it's catastrophic, coming from education, if you fail on safeguarding, you failed completely. Yeah, so that's a really important KPI there. And the ability to be, I think, just the nuance of slight nuance of just being able to filter slightly different ways as well. It's not particularly, it's good as it is, but you could start to introduce filters so you could quickly zoom in on where the actions are required and where there really are key performance indicators. Thank you.
Ed, thanks very much. Paul, sorry to put you on the spot, but do you want to come back on any of those at the moment, please?
Yes, and thank you for everyone's contribution. This will help strengthen our approach going forward, so really appreciate that. I mean, just to pick up on Councillor Mallon's point around KPIs and then potentially being contentious, that's exactly why we're proposing a performance framework that is wider than just KPIs, delivery commitments, regularly reporting, an annual review of what we've delivered against the plan, just so there's a more rounded way of demonstrating delivery or demonstrating performance, good and bad, and plenty of opportunity to debate that and challenge that. So thank you for that observation. Pick up the issues around consistency. Yes, appreciate you will hopefully see the next report being in much simpler format because again the report today is deliberately two halves. You know, one is a look back on court form, one is introducing a new performance framework. Going forward, you'll have a simple report. There is time to do some further engagement. We have engaged with members of this predecessor committee, the Finance Improvement Committee, in selecting some of those KPIs and design the framework. But we're very happy to continue working in a workshop format to develop and finish this further. I can't answer on your. I can't answer particularly on your points about specific PIs, Bernie, but there might be colleagues around the table who can.
I can't go into all the details, certainly. Just wanted to pick up, because it's a really important metric, the school readiness that both yourself and Councillor Huseman have picked up. Really important metric, definitely in terms of the inequalities. It's been picked up as part of the national work as well. If you look back at the, obviously, children coming through the pandemic, it's obviously a real concern for everyone. So there is some nationally set targets, which you'll see linking through here. The programme that's coming, that was mentioned, the transformation programme, the children's transformation programme, particularly the Best Start in Life, is looking to address some of that. So that scrutiny going forward is going to be a really important part of that in 6 months, but also the report that you're going to see coming through to Cabinet is really important in showing how we're starting to address some of this. There's a huge number of areas around that, including the children's hubs and getting those in the right areas, but it's definitely an issue, recognising that, and there's a work in terms of the transformation programme. I don't have all of the detail, but we'll can make sure you'll get that through the committee.
Thanks, Rachel. And can I just butt in on that before handing back to Paul to say, again, it feels like one of those issues which may be one for us or maybe for people or whatever the other relevant committee is, but certainly it's come up as a key concern for several of members here. So keeping us informed on that, I think, would be very helpful. You want to come back, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just to pick up on another one of Councillor Mallon's points, which I forgot to do first time asking. It's the climate change and carbon mitigation indicators. You'll see in reference in the report that we draw heavily on the local outcomes framework in terms of determining our KPIs. They are KPIs we have to report against anyway, so we've folded many of them into this framework. We can easily fold a few more in, specifically around carbon, the climate change related ones, but note in the local outcomes framework that actually the specific indicator they're proposing for climate change mitigation is still actually a placeholder, so it hasn't yet been determined. But the principle of folding one or two in from the LOF, the local outcomes framework, we can absolutely look at. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. And I think I'm going to be moving us on, if that's okay. Obviously, if there's other points which you feel we haven't covered, then I'm sure Paul will be receptive to follow-ups by email. But take your point very much, Gary, that of course, Paul and others are open to those individual conversations and briefings, but in our role to help members of the council understand these issues better, thinking of ways that we can help share that more, and those wonderful one sides of A4 with consistent KPIs, etc., may be where we might be going in due course. But let's move on, if we may. Firstly, to check, the recommendations are there as 3.1, 3.2, basically for us to note and review. Are we all happy with that? Great, thank you. Moving on then to improvement plan. Paul, is that you again?
It certainly looked like that, Chair, yes.
Thanks very much.
And already looking forward to the questions that are forthcoming. So, yes, thank you, Chair. So this report is an update on the delivery, the progress, and early impact of the Council's improvement plan. And you recall the improvement plan being approved at full Council back in December 2025 in response to the financial emergency, but also a range of other external recommendations. The plan remains the Council's overarching framework for stabilisation, recovery and longer term transformation. It's structured around those three core aims, which still remain absolutely relevant to achieving financial sustainability, establishing clear priorities and purpose, but also enabling a high-performing workforce. The report suggests that overall progress is broadly in line with that plan, with some significant early milestones achieved. So the securing of EFS, setting of a realistic, robust budget, as has already been mentioned, 26-27, strengthening some financial management practices. You mentioned budget monitoring, Chair, a short time ago, and also improving some facets of corporate governance and compliance. Alongside this, of course, some real foundational work being completed to support the long-term improvement of the organisation, not least the new corporate plan, which we've just been discussing, but also early work to develop a transformation savings portfolio for the medium term, a key facet of that financial sustainability strategy, but also key organisational strategies such as digital, procurement, commissioning, and of course the people plan. We've supported the delivery of the improvement plan with robust governance and assurance arrangements, and we took a report to the Audit and Governance Committee a couple of months back on that, and I've linked to that from the report. But also, not least, oversight by an externally chaired improvement board, and I think that's the critical point to land at the committee today, Chair, is this improvement plan is subject to regular scrutiny and oversight by that improvement board. So while many early activities are focused on, as you'd expect to, building sustainable foundations across the organisation, there are some emerging signs of positive impact, particularly in terms of compliance, staff engagement, organisational clarity. And it feels like we're moving now into the next phase of the organisation's improvement, which will focus on embedding some of that new practice, some of those new plans, continuing to strengthen, of course, financial sustainability, but also starting, as the report summarises, starting to refresh some of the key programmes to reflect both delivery to date, but also those evolving organisational needs. I'll pause there, Chair, and very happy to at least attempt to answer some questions and observations from the committee.
Thank you very much, Paul, and I'm sure we're all very clear that this is a crucial bit of the Council moving forward to its new, more stable, more sustainable role going forward. I have one or two little points, but any other points from members? And just to say, I'm hoping we can get on to our next report in about 9 or 10 minutes, but Dawn, you'd like to come in, and who else? Dawn, thank you.
I need to start by asking about section 6.3, which says, while all reports to members provide the financial implications of decisions being taken, this may change. as officers and our portfolio holders review the overall financial situation. And I'd like to know exactly what you mean by that. Are we not going to be getting that information anymore? Just need to clarify.
I saw that too.
Yeah. So, Chair, this report shows genuine progress on governance, compliance and short-term stabilisation. The plan is stronger on intent than on demonstrable delivery of a sustainable financial solution. It shows that the Council is much better organised than it was, but it does not yet clearly show how the structural deficit will be removed, how reliance on EFS will be reduced, or how difficult service decisions will be taken and delivered over the medium term. I'm very much hoping that we get this single plan as we move forward. The auditors required a realistic medium-term plan to reduce reliance on any EFS. Is this the report that's going to be coming forward next month? So that we can see a year-by-year pathway showing how that reliance will reduce. We're told that the structural deficit is better understood, but members still need to see it clearly quantified across the life of the MTFP, along with how each year's gap will be closed. Again, will that be delivered next month? The report says a financial sustainability strategy has been outlined, but when will members see a fully costed, risk-assessed and deliverable savings and transformation plan? If major savings or transformation projects slip, we'd like to see more about contingencies, because we've had issues in the past, and if it happens again, we need to have a plan B. So apart from being able to live within our means, our residents' key areas of concern relate to the impacts on service as a result of the difficult decisions that do have to be made. What difficult service decisions still need to be taken to achieve sustainability, and what timetable exists for those decisions? Has the Council now identified the full cost of delivering statutory duties at minimum viable level, and how will that be used in budget setting? And how will that be communicated to our residents? How will members be able to distinguish between one-off stabilisation measures and recurring structural solutions? My view is that scrutiny should acknowledge the progress made, but also be clear that this is still a partial answer to the auditor's concerns. We should ask Cabinet to return with a clearer delivery framework showing quantified savings, milestones, risks, investment requirements, contingencies and a credible route away from dependence on EFS in a clearly understood fashion, please.
Thank you, Dawn. Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you. In Appendix 1, Summary of Delivery, there are two which are amber, Transformation Programme and Digital Programme, but it's not clear why those are amber from the summary. So if either now or in the next future ones, can you just explain, you know, if things are amber red, just a simple one line, two lines saying this is amber because ... Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. Paul, I'm going to invite you, as you may expect, to come back in again. But I just wonder, Dawn, some of what you're asking for is possibly outside the scope of Paul and the improvement plan. And yes, I completely agree with the need to be very joined up about it and to be answering those financial questions. Mm-hmm. But is that really something which we hope to get out of the improvement plan, Paul? Or is that really back to Duncan, who has come back on the screen again? Paul, over to you. And Duncan, if you want to come back in, please do.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Gentlemen, just before you answer, I'm not seeing these as separate things. The improvement plan needs to be linked to the actual finances. We need to see what we're going to do and the financial impact that's going to have on the council. That's what I'm trying to get at there, if I wasn't clear, sorry.
Paul, come back first, please, if you would.
So maybe if I just kick off and then Duncan will come in. So it's just a reminder really, so the improvement plan is a key document for the council setting out those aims and priorities, one of which is to deliver financial stability and sustainability. It doesn't in and of itself detail every set of activity or plan or programme that will deliver that. It provides the basis for that. So some of the key activities that need developing driven by the plan are a financial sustainability strategy, which will be a part of the MTFP refresh, but also transformation and change or transformation savings portfolio over the medium term. So they are both things in development. So, and you know, we are, in terms of our overall flight path, and you'll see that at the final appendix in the report, very much in a period, you know, if you take financial emergency, September, the period between September and March, April time this year, very much around immediate stabilisation recovery, and you'll have seen programmes, one in the improvement plan, very much focused in on that, and now into a period of robust planning for the future and financial sustainability of the council, which means things like transformation and change, and all the other facets of the MTFP that contribute to that as well. And that's a good segue into Duncan, I think.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm just going to invite Duncan in a second, but first, before I say that, perhaps Dawn, as your vice chair, Line chair, we need to have another conversation about this at another time, to think through how the work of this committee can help towards your very valid questions. Duncan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to reinforce, a lot of the stuff that you mentioned there, Dawn, will be in the MTFP in July, but just maybe controlling. I can't control expectations. Managing expectations. The first thing you'll read in that July cabinet report is that you're going to get another one in October. And the reason for that is we're gathering more and more data, more and more intelligence all the time. The EFS numbers are going to be different in July than they were in February, and they'll be different in October again. And there are so many moving parts in this recovery journey that we are on. I can't predict what inflation is going to do, what Trumpflation will be, what pay awards will be, even what government funding may be available moving forward, as there were over 50 councils last year in exceptional financial support, which doesn't make it exceptional anymore by my reckoning. We don't know what interest rates will do. There's just and we don't know critically, I think, what the demand behaviour is going to be for both children's and adults. So there will be moving parts, and there is a risk for us in terms of over planning and over strategizing. We've got to be quite nimble and flexible in the way that we're managing within our new governance structure, which is certainly tighter than before, and I think can give us more confidence that we're not going to make some of the mistakes that we made previously. But this is a very fluid situation, and I'm sorry I can't bring you all really more certainty, but I'm afraid we do not live in a certain world in local government finance right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. And Heather, did you want to come and comment at all at the moment?
Only in that absolutely things keep changing all of the time, not least that suddenly HMRC will allow us justifiably to allow travel to go from the 45p a mile to 50, which then puts an extra 5p on every carer, everybody going out to do all sorts of services, which suddenly has had to come into our budget. So it's just a really good example of actually how things are changing from day to day. And it did need to change. It's just we have no funding to fund it. And there are a whole range of other things. What nobody has actually mentioned, and Dawn did in passing, is talking about the statutory minimum. But we are gradually, as we look at contracts and so on, looking at what a statutory minimum actually means, so that we only deliver what we have to deliver. And also, across the board, we cannot anymore provide the services which are nice to have rather than the things that actually we would really like to do, because we just do not have the money. And we have to, as I said earlier, I didn't come into politics to do these things. I really didn't. But we are in a position now where we're being watched by MHCLG, we're being watched by a whole range of different people. In fact, we're going through best value at the present time. We have to do this, and you will get a range of these things as we can work them out through contracts and so on. You can't suddenly remove things from some contracts because we're in a contractual situation. It will cost us more money. So it's really complex, all of this, really complex. And the improvement plan will be bringing us together with all of that and the improvement board itself. you will get all of these things, but there are two bits, and you're right, Chris. There's what needs to come here, and there's what the improvement board actually needs, and the improvement board is in the process of going through some changes too. So I think it's a watch this space to see what really sits here well and what sits just with the improvement.
Thank you very much, Heather, and sorry to put you on the spot, but that's a very helpful reminder of the context on that. I'm going to, if I may, move us forward to look at the recommendations.
Chris, you didn't have an answer to a question. That Dawn asked, 6.3, what all reports from members provide financial implications. Sorry. Being taken, this may change as officers, blah, blah, blah. I would really like an answer to that, because that says you're not going to get an opportunity to scrutinise decisions. So,
thank you, Duncan. I hope that's a typo of some kind. Paul, if you could have a look at that and comment on that, please.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, I think it's simply, it's a standard paragraph, has been for a while in that bit of the report, and I think it's essentially saying financial implications are obviously right at the time of writing a report, but as you've just heard, financial position is evolving all of the time, so it's just caveated with that kind of observation, really.
And so just to clarify, you're saying that the financial implications may change, not whether those reports will no longer come to members. Is that was your concern, wasn't it, Dawn? Yeah. Yes. So the suggestion, the misinterpretation of that, which I shared and Duncan shares, is that members will no longer receive all those reports. No. The point is that the financial implications will change, not whether members will see the reports. Is that clear now, I think? Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Chair.
Duncan. Yes.
Chair, I think it's a useful prompt, actually. There's a lot of standard words in there, and we haven't got, hasn't come to the top of the list yet, but I think we need to change those words, make them less ambiguous.
Great, thanks very much. I'm going to move us on to look at those recommendations then, if I may, and just check we're all happy with those at 3.1 and 3.2. Thank you very much for the discussion. Thank you very much, Paul. And we're going to whiz on to the next item. I'm very aware we have concerned members of the public with us as well, who've waited patiently for the next item after this one. But let's crack on then with the organisational transformation report, and I think that's Rachel to report to us. Thank you,
Chair. I'm going to introduce it. I'll keep it brief because I know obviously the focus needs to be on the discussion that will take place. So Rachel Robinson, I'm here in the capacity as Interim Deputy Chief Exec for this particular report. So this report shares the findings of the independent review of the 2023-24 PwC Commission. The review was undertaken by local partnerships. The report was commissioned following commitment from the Improvement Board, who asked that this be passed to scrutiny. It was commissioned through sector-led improvement funding, which was from the LGA, and best practice from aligned to best practice from other authorities undertaking similar work. It's been brought to scrutiny today for full transparency, comment and debate. The review was set to focus on particularly lessons learned and future learning. A number of areas, but particularly focusing on the strategic purpose of the partnership with PwC, how the relationship was managed and the extent to which the original objectives were achieved. It is a forward-looking report, it's collaborative and it's aimed at identifying opportunities for improvement. It's important to say it wasn't an audit, it's not intended to apportion fault or blame, it's a sector-led improvement report intended to be instructive and forward-thinking. The report provides a summary of the lessons that can be learned and guidance on how similar work could be managed in the future, including how we manage any external support and commission that. The cover report then, we've added a little bit more detail, that provides our initial responses to the organisation, from the organisation to the critical and essential recommendations and observations that were made by local partnerships. Some of the key changes that we have drawn out are the Budget Transformation and Change Review Panel, strengthened finance and procedure functions, clearer accountability for delivery to demonstrate the step change in how we plan, commission and oversee major transformation. There'll be greater visibility, stronger elected member oversight, including through this committee, and a clear expectation that transformation is owned and led by the whole organisation. The independent review was, as I said, was undertaken by local partnerships. It has provided the council with clear, constructive insight into our previous approach to transformation. We welcome the challenge and learning, which has been here to help and has helped to fundamentally shape a way forward. Before I hand back to the chair, just to note, I believe Kevin Jones, who's one of the lead authors from the report, is online and hopefully can help with technical questions only on the report. But we've also got colleagues in the room because, it's, as you can see, it's a wide-ranging report with recommendations across the organisation. And I think, just before I hand back, I think Councillor Wagner, who's the transformation portfolio holder, would like to make a few comments.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction and for pressing on with it. Councillor Wagner, please, and I think Rosemary also is wanting to come in. Thank you.
Fabulous. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, Chairman, and Rachel, thank you for the excellent and useful presentation of what is a difficult topic where it's important to be forward-focused. So as this report is in my name as portfolio holder, I think the traditional way you started by saying you're pleased to bring it and everything in it, but I'm not sure pleased is quite the right word given the nature of the review. So if not pleased, what I do feel very strongly is that what we have in front of us proves that it was absolutely the right decision to commission this review independently and get some tough feedback to change the council for the better. Many of the concerns highlighted in it will not come as a surprise to members. Certainly from the opposition benches at the time, there were long-standing questions about the governance of the transformation programme, level of oversight, role of consultants, visibility of delivery, and ultimately whether the programme was achieving the outcomes intended. That's precisely why an independent review was needed. Rather than relying on assumptions or just having a political argument, the council now has a rather more objective assessment of what worked, what did not work, and what lessons should shape that future transformation activity. Reading the review, I think it's fair to say it paints a concerning picture of how the previous transformation programme was commissioned, governed and overseen. Whilst the review was not intended to apportion blame, in fact it does a very good job of not doing that, it does identify shortcomings around business cases, governance, commercial assurance, screening, many topics. I think it's a very good thing that members and residents will have some independent clarity on the extent and nature of those issues. The review at its core, I think, found that some key decisions were concentrated within a relatively small group. There was limited wider scrutiny and there wasn't sufficient assurance process to test whether the programme retained strategically coherent and represented value for money. What were the priorities of the organisation and were they being achieved? That is a question that I think needs to be asked more. I think it also highlights some concerns around the organisational engagement and whether the programme was embraced across the council. Taken individually, these would be bad, but together, those are really not minor observations. They help explain why, despite all the activity and noise at the time, concerns remained where they were. It explains why we are where we are, basically, and I think it does a really good job of that. However, I don't want to dwell on that too much, though I think the committee ought to be asking questions, because what is most important for me about this is not simply the diagnosis, it's the response. Alongside the leader and Councillor Evans with the finance portfolio and as the portfolio holder myself, working with our officers, our focus has to be less on looking backwards and more on ensuring we learn the right lessons and embed them into how we work going forward. So to that end, I think section 5 is the most important part of the council report as opposed to the review, because what it sets out is a fundamentally different approach to transformation, some of which Rachel's spoken about already. I know Paul and others were alluding to it throughout the discussion today. Firstly, future transformation activity has to be driven by robust business cases, clear benefits, realistic delivery plans and proper assessment on return of investment through the Budget, Transformation and Change Review Panel. That is an important shift from identifying opportunities for change to ensuring there's a disciplined process for deciding which opportunities should actually proceed. The BTCP, as I've been trying to remember the tone, I think Paul's advice was think of TCP, is pretty essential to that process. And I think members ought to familiarise themselves with what that process looks like and how it works. I know the chair has been briefed. I think it would be good for the committee to have similar as well. Secondly, governance and oversight are being strengthened significantly. We now have that regular leadership board oversight, strengthened programme management office arrangements, which are continually under review and in rigorous improvement, greater involvement from finance, procurement and commissioning, and clearer accountability in that contract managing and delivery piece. I think that will be touched on later, possibly by Laura. Transformation, if it is going to work, can't sit within a small part of the organisation. It can't even be seen as a purely financial project. It has to be visible and understood. Thirdly, the report recognises the importance of assurance and scrutiny, which I hope the administration is demonstrating in its approach to. The review is critical of that limited challenge and assurance around the previous programme. Going forward, there must be and there will be regular reporting to this committee and Cabinet, stronger benefits realisation monitoring, and consideration of that internal audit involvement and process where it's appropriate. Fourthly, there's a very clear emphasis on organisational ownership. One of the strongest messages from the review is that transformation cannot be something delivered to the Council by someone else. It must be owned by the Council itself. That means officer leadership, political oversight, programme ownership, communication, and ensuring external support complements our capability, rather than, as I think has been the case, replaces our capability. I'm also particularly pleased to see the focus on strengthening the finance function, improving commissioning and procurement arrangements, and developing that smarter client approach and a more rigorous framework for managing delivery. These are not glamorous changes. They're unlikely to make it to the front page of many election leaflets, but they're absolutely fundamental if we're going to be a stronger and more resilient council in the future. As I say, I know Laura and her team and Tanya and many others in this room are working extremely hard on that. Ultimately, I think this report shows an organisation that is willing to look honestly at its past decisions, learn from them and adapt. I think we are constrained by the past, not by the future. The local partnerships review provides some uncomfortable reading in places, but it also provides a framework to strengthen our improvement. Our task now as a council, more broadly as members, but also as a cabinet, is to make sure those lessons are not just acknowledged, but they are acted on. And we all know that discomfort can often be a necessary prerequisite to making what are necessary changes. So I know the whole cabinet feels the way, but as the portfolio holder and leading on some of these transformation schemes from the cabinet end, I'm certainly committed to ensuring that we continue driving forward those changes in Section 5. The real measure of success will not be whether or not we agree with the recommendations today. It will be whether over the coming months and years we can demonstrate that governance, accountability, value for money, realistic savings delivery, whether those projects going to BTCP are genuinely owned by the organisation and deliver some benefits. So I think we've been taking a lot of excellent action. I think it's that the review has been a necessary and welcome thing, but those recommendations are, I suppose, where the cabinet is at and what we want to focus on delivering over the coming weeks, months, years, who knows, maybe decades. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm slightly worried about the time at the moment, and I remember Chief Executive saying that several people have to leave 12ish, and we still have 3 substantive items after this. So this, the recommendations on this state that there will be regular reporting both to this committee and cabinet. So maybe we can look forward to having a deeper discussion about all this at the next report, and that might indeed be that we could something we could slot in to our July meeting if that happens. But Rosemary, you wanted to comment. Dawn and Ed, but please can we, and Gary, please. Malcolm. Sorry, Malcolm, sorry. I was looking at the chair next to you. Must put my glasses back on. But please can we keep this brief, because otherwise I'm afraid we're going to run out of time for some important people who are here, and we won't be able to discuss items 10 and, is it 10 and 11 as well as I'd hoped we would. Anyway, Rosemary.
Yeah, thank you. So this report is really sad, isn't it? It tells a story of a huge amount of money being spent on a project that has failed. So it has the hallmarks of a council unable to make difficult decisions, which is in part understandable. The whole project was kept within a small number of people, kept within a closed group, when it should have had buy-in from all levels of staff, and that's on the officer side of the council as well as the political buy-in from all parties. So at the time the contract operated, the council was developing a reduced management structure that was never properly embedded, neither with staff nor politically. Staff were confused about even the basics of how that management structure was to work. So how this contract could possibly have been successful in that, under that atmosphere, it just was doomed to fail, really. And we are now for at least the next 5 years in the territory of difficult decision making. So we must learn those lessons of culture, really, which this report to me just sings out the culture that I've always found frustrating at the council. We must emphasise cross-party working, transparency and communication throughout the council as we go forward. And those have to be our watchwords. We could all talk for hours about this report, couldn't we? But I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Rosemary. Dawn and then Ed, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence, because this was actually one of the very first things that I highlighted that I wanted to look at when I got elected last year at the very first T&I committee meeting. So it's been a while. I want to address what I think are the most serious issues raised by this report, and those being value for money and the democratic accountability to our residents. So firstly, on value for money, we're told that this programme identified significant savings, around 20 million recurring and 5 million one-off. What the report does not clearly demonstrate is something far more important, a clear explanation of what has actually been delivered. Where is the clear breakdown of delivered versus identified savings? I also want to address the issue of scope creep and cost escalation. This programme began as a relatively limited commission, around £200,000 of initial work, but has ultimately resulted in a spend of around 13 million. That is a very significant escalation. In fact, it's a fundamental shift in scale. The report makes clear that the role of the transformation partner expanded beyond identifying savings into areas like the design and delivery of digital solutions, plus their implementation, with no evidence of a formal options appraisal, a best value assessment, or a business case for that expansion. In particular, we're now looking at over 7 million of spend on digital solution development, some of which may even need to be scrapped or reprocured. I'm also deeply concerned about scrutiny and democratic accountability, because scrutiny by elected members is not optional. It is fundamental to how this council is held to account. It is how decisions are tested, how risks are challenged, and how public money is safeguarded. I've been asking for detailed information of this transformation work for over a year. I've repeatedly asked for members to be able to properly scrutinise it, and yet access to information by members has not been provided. Instead, elected members have not had the timely access to information needed for meaningful scrutiny, and that has left the committee relying on a retrospective review carried out by, I'm sure, a very competent external expert because of potential legal issues. So what we now have is a report that is very careful in tone, very measured in its conclusions, but which in my view does not fully confront the seriousness of the issues raised. In my view, I still do not have the information that I asked for a year ago. But residents are not experiencing this as a technical exercise. They are experiencing the consequences of financial decisions made here that affect their services, their council tax and delivery on the ground. So what we needed was not a retrospective analysis. We needed real-time scrutiny while decisions are being made. I very much hope from the recommendations that have been put forward that that will never happen again. Because at the end of the day, that's the whole point of this committee and of democratic oversight. So this report identifies activity, effort and opportunity, but what it should do is demonstrate what has actually been delivered, what is fully realised and what is still uncertain. And what matters, and that matters because residents are not interested in process, they are interested in outcomes. They want to know that their money has been spent wisely and that promised savings and improvements have actually materialised. So, Chair, I'll cut that bit out, make it quick for you. But this is ultimately not about consultants. It's about whether this council has maintained sufficiently strong control over a major programme, whether it's ensured the level of transparency and accountability that residents are entitled to expect, and whether it's demonstrated clear, measurable outcomes for residents. And I'm not seeing those yet. So I hope, and I note and welcome, the recommendations in the report which focus on strengthening the fundamentals that were missing. If fully implemented, these measures should significantly reduce the risk of similar failures by improving transparency and accountability. However, their success will depend on consistent application in practice, particularly around financial tracking, plus, and I emphasise this, around member scrutiny, because good processes only work if they are used and enforced. I finish with the most important question of all, which I still cannot answer, which is exactly what did residents actually get for their £13 million? Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Ed, and then we have Malcolm, and then Heather would like to come in again.
Thank you, Chair. One of the first points I'd like to make, actually, is this is scrutiny. And I appreciate people need to provide information, but we have the reports as well, and we can read them ourselves. Okay, first point, because there's limited time, and it's the members of the committee that should be scrutinising what is being done. Okay. Secondly, now we don't want to keep it. We don't want to make it political, but I think that there's probably a diversity of opinion on what consultants do and whether they're worthwhile in an ideological way. My personal view is you get the right people in to do a job, and PwC are experts. They've looked at thousands and thousands and thousands of these kind of cost-saving exercises, and they've done them elsewhere. Okay, they have expertise that we do not have, and that is acknowledged already. That we don't have expertise here. Now, I'll look at the figures. We made net savings, so, and those weren't just one-off. So the circa is 5 million one-off. Okay, but actually we're talking about 20 million per annum savings. Okay, it cost us 13 million, but I'm quite happy to go to my residents and tell them we invested 13 million to make 5 million one-off and then 20 million savings per annum. That is a considerable net saving to residents. The issue is there weren't enough savings, and some of those were supposed to be seen over the medium and longer term. But unfortunately, we won't see those because the contract was terminated. So we don't know what would have happened. So this isn't a black and white situation here. There is a question of whether officers followed through on recommendations and where they're being held to account, not just consultants, but the actual people that are in the payroll of the Shropshire Council taxpayers as well. So the other point I make is, as far as I can see, that they've made savings in excess of what our currently targeted savings are, which are £5 million. Is that correct? So, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Malcolm, and then Heather.
Yeah, just keep it very brief. Just 3 questions or comments on the specific report itself, so the Appendix A, particularly section 3.2. So my first point is about the bids that came in. There were 3 bids, and the statement is no comparative tender evaluation was available for review, which I'm gobsmacked at, absolutely gobsmacked. So I think there should be one somewhere. So can we see if we can get that for review? Second point is it talks about proportional balance between the various elements of the fees, but doesn't actually talk what the numbers are and what that proportion is. So can we see that? And the third one, which I guess is straying a little bit from lessons learned, but it's about the milestones and the deliverables themselves. Do we get to review those and the acceptance criteria against each of those deliverables so we can see what was actually delivered and how that was measured? Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. And I think Laura wanted to come in as well. Do you want to come in before the leader?
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to give a bit of an assurance and an update in terms of some of the changes that we've made, certainly over the last year. Recognising particularly our procurement and contracting has been limited and quite poor in terms of capacity and resource. Last year we did a self-assessment against the procurement activity and benchmarked ourselves. As part of that, we've got a massive service improvement plan. We've got, as part of the actions around that, investment in terms of a new structure, so putting in the additional capacity in terms of procurement and contract support. The governance has changed entirely as well, so every bit of commissioned work has to go through the procurement team without fail. So in terms of the lessons learned, we wouldn't be doing that from even if we've got a framework, we are putting things through procurement to say, how do we get best value out of what we're trying to do? They are scrutinising it in terms of what is it you're asking? You're not clear, making sure we've got KPIs. So from that perspective, things have changed substantially. We've got business cases being pushed through in terms of looking at return on investment. We've also got a new contract system that will go live later this year, which will ensure that we have an accountable contract owner for every piece of work. So they are accountable for that service delivery and making sure that they've got best value. We're also going to be rolling out a wider contract management training later in the year based upon lower level and higher level contracts as well. So just trying really to upskill all staff across, because we are, as an organisation, all accountable for services that we're delivering. That's just a few things that we're doing in terms of just some improvements that we've made, certainly over the last year. I just wanted to provide some reassurance, because clearly that is coming through the report, and we're already on that journey with that at the moment.
Thank you, Laura. That's very helpful indeed. I'm going to ask Heather to come in a moment, but are we going to feel we've made our points and we've asked our questions and those can be responded to? Perhaps, Rachel, you might want to come back on one or two, but after Heather. But we really have to move on because we have colleagues from the public who've been waiting here a long time. Heather.
I think the point I wanted to make, and I'm sure Dawn is well aware of this, that actually our manifesto was very clear that we wanted proper procurement and contract management in place. And therefore, the lessons learned from this report are vitally important to us for the future. It's there in black and white, it's there in the new direction, and it's exactly what's being put in place. It takes time to build, and it takes time to make sure it's embedded. But actually, the work that Laura is doing is already, with her department, really delivering for us, so that we will never be in the position that this report outlines again. So, the most important thing about this report is it has given us the areas where we needed to actually improve. We are improving and have been fundamentally improving on those since the very beginning. And the other most important thing about it is that we keep ourselves safe financially. Thank you.
Rachel, I'll invite you back in a second, but Bernie, you've got a quick point?
Thank you, Chair. I just, on a general point, wonder if this committee might hear items that involve the public at an early stage where possible, so that the members of the public are not waiting for long periods.
Thank you, Bernie. Can I sympathise with that and say that items 10 and 11 did reach us fairly late, so apologies, but we'll be with you in a few minutes, I hope. And I've got a comment to make after Rachel, if I may, please. Thank you.
Yes, we'll get full answers to all the questions and we'll come back. Just a couple of points to pick up on that I think have already some been picked up. So in terms of the figures, in terms of the return on investment, as I said, the report points to the 5 million one-off and the 20 million recurrent, and I think that's the facts that are laid out within the report for the 3 million that was put into the contract. So, but I appreciate all the levels of detail that you were asking for, not in this report, but they're certainly in Cabinet papers, previous reports, which detail where savings were and weren't delivered. I think just to mention the points you made, I think the scrutiny oversight, absolutely. That's a clear commitment that's been made and recognised as a gap within the report, and a commitment, and for one of those reasons, absolutely, to bring that forward. Likewise, I think the financial point that you made around making sure that they are tracked through savings and transformation savings are deliverable. That point, absolutely critical, and that's our commitment around the savings, 5 million this year, and any of those savings plans going forward into the medium-term financial strategy and others. I think that's a really clear learning. There's other questions that I could pick up, but I guess it's that commitment. As you can see, the actions are already being taken, and the point that you raised around bringing those actions back and making sure that this committee's got oversight of some of the work that's been done, whether that's, as we've already seen, some of the procurement work or the improvement plan working. I think the report clearly shows some of those creeps, that those cultural change, that they're multifaceted for the reasons that those happened. That's my interpretation of what was within the report, and that's a fundamental part of why the improvement plan, for example, includes a high-performing workforce. So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of those points. We'll get the full answers back, but that commitment to take forward all of the recommendations in the report with the actions we've already said, and to bring those individual actions back to the committees as need to be.
Thank you, Rachel. And can I just say, I think it's been a very interesting, though rather swift, discussion of these issues, and I feel a bit of frustration around the room that we'd all like to be digging into the recommendations and the ways forward that the organisation is going, the kind of developments in terms of new boards, new structures, new controls, being positive about that, constructive about that. And I think maybe at the next meeting or the next time a report comes back, that we make sure we allow ourselves, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour even, to be able to dig into that properly. So I think I have to thank officers and move us forward at this point. I was going to make one other quick point before that. No, I've lost it. I'll come back to that later, if I may. Yes, well, thank you very much for the board. And of course, we have to do the right thing and check the recommendations and approve those. Sorry, my other point, it came back to me and I lost it again. Yes, let's leave it. So on the recommendations, items 3.1 and 3A and B, we're happy about those, aren't they? And noting the intention to report regularly to both this committee and Cabinet about progress with delivery of Council's transformation and savings portfolio, which is, I think, what we're all agreed we very much support and want to have the chance to scrutinise going forward. Thank you very much all, and I'm sorry Kevin, we didn't get back to you with more detailed queries, but next time, I'm sure. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on now, if we may, and thank you all for bearing with us on this, to items 10 and 11, but I've suggested that we move to item 11 before 10, if that's all right. So looking at the Helena Lane proposals first, if that's okay, because I believe our colleagues in the audience here are from Helena Lane. Do we have anybody here from Aquamira concerned about that? I don't think we do. Thank you. So I'm going to invite officers. Yes. I'm going to invite Natalie and Daniel, who have been patiently sitting waiting for some time, to present the report to us. I think just to refresh briefly, our concerns obviously as a committee are to be looking at process and policy and consultation and making sure that we're convinced that that has worked well, if it has. And from my discussions, I believe it has, but it's up to the committee. And of course, to be looking at those financial issues which are identified in the business case report, which has been tabled and open to others to look at. So is that all right with us all as a committee? That steer to Natalie and Daniel. So Natalie, please go ahead.
Okay, just to begin with, just by proper way of introduction, I'm Natalie McFall, I'm the Interim Director of Adult Social Services.
I'm Daniel Powner, I'm the Service Manager for In-House Provision.
Okay, thank you. So we're starting with the Helena Lane Day Service Report. I'll take the report as read and focus on the salient points relevant for this committee. It should be noted for context that in response to the external auditors, we've discussed that in other items today, the Grant Thornton report and value for money assessment. There was a call for urgent action across the council. That included a comprehensive review of all services to identify costs of delivering statutory responsibilities. The review of Helena Lane Day Service also forms part of the wider adult social care transformation programme. The report provides the committee with the findings of the review for Helena Lane Day Service, including its financial sustainability and the documented local assets within the area that can be used to meet need. So Helena Lane Day Service currently provides a building-based service, day service in Ludlow. It includes structured activity, social interaction, personal care, assisted bathing and respite for unpaid carers. The report states that the service is operating at sustained low utilisation. The financial case set out in the report is that the service has a forecast gross annual budget of £194,320, forecast income of £24,582, and a forecast net annual cost of £169,738. Currently, there are 5 people who attend the day service. This accounts for 10 attendance days per week. The report therefore concludes that the current model does not represent value for money and is difficult to justify in the context of the Council's financial emergency and best value duty. The report also recognises, however, that the consultation showed clear opposition to closure, particularly around respite, assisted bathing, dementia-related support and rural transport barriers. These concerns have informed the equality analysis, transition planning and mitigation measures. The legal position set out is that the Council's duty is to assess and meet eligible needs under the Care Act, but not to maintain necessarily a specific building-based service model. The proposed mitigations therefore include active contact with attendees and carers, the offer of Care Act reviews and carers assessments where appropriate, person-centred transition planning and support to access alternative provision where needed. So in summary, the issue for this committee is whether members are satisfied that the financial sustainability case is robust, that the proposed mitigations are credible and proportionate, and whether any recommendation should now be made to Cabinet on the 10th of June. So I'll stop that there and open for questions.
Thank you, Natalie. Daniel, did you want to add anything at this point?
Not at this point, thank you.
Thank you. So we have a proposal there which is going to Cabinet on Wednesday. They're the decision-making body, and I believe they've been in touch with Helena Lane colleagues about how that motion is held. Who would anybody like to come in on this? I've got Ed, and I've got Malcolm, and I've got Dawn, and I've got Sam, and I've got Bernie. Okay, good. Well, let's crack on. And depending how the questions come up, if they are questions, then we may come back to you, Natalie and Daniel, on the way. Ed, then, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, this type of support in the community and funded work is it's always going to be a cost to the council, as we can see when we look at the budgets. It's part of the largest budget in the entire council. So the amount that's being saved, there's 2 sides to this, isn't there? One is we need to save money, and we know that we need to make difficult decisions. It's not a political thing. Whoever's in charge would have to make those decisions. And then the other question is really where you make those savings. Now, in my mind, as a council, as government, if you like, we are here to, as a minimum, to provide services to those that are the most vulnerable, that cannot help themselves. That's the whole point of it all, really. And this is an extremely difficult and challenging decision. I can understand both sides of the argument. The question I would have, though, really, to keep it short, is: have we thought about the medium to long-term impact of this closure? Because the conversation we've had all morning, and we've had over a period of months and years, is about how these kind of services, the demand is growing and growing and growing, and that's why we saw a 30 million budget surplus in that particular directorate in the last outturn report. So
deficit, was it? Or was
sorry,
it
deficit. Yeah, yes, it. Sorry, a deficit. Unfortunately. So yeah, that's the question really. Is there aren't many youths at the moment. How are we advertising this? How are we marketing this? Are we trying to draw people in? Surely there's demand out there, but it's not being used. And what's the outlook, and what's the alternative?
Thank you, Ed. And kind of rhetorically, I'd pose back the question: that decision is, of course, one for Cabinet, and are we assured that the process to this point has been as well progressed as it might be, I think, and that is what we as a committee need to assure ourselves of. The point about the medium and longer term, I think, is an important one, and hopefully Natalie can come back on that in a minute. Malcolm.
Yeah, actually, just following on from what Ed has said, I'd be interested to understand. Yes, it says that current number of attendees is 5, but what's the historical numbers? Is that been stable? Has it been going up? Has it been going down? And also, what sort of future modelling for demand has been done to take into consideration? Because 5 people is a snapshot, and will it change in 6 months, a year, etc. As Ed said.
Thank you, Malcolm. Great. And Dawn.
A number of concerns over the process were raised by the representative for Helena Lane, including things like transparency and timing of disclosure, equalities analysis, financial inconsistencies, lack of meaningful alternative options, and other areas. So they were quite process related. And they raised legitimate scrutiny questions about the robustness of the evidence base, quality of the decision-making process, the adequacy of consultation, and the reliability of the financial case. So that's what I'm highlighting here, and I just have 4 questions. So why do the staffing numbers and cost figures appear to differ between officer briefings, the business case, and other published papers, and which figures are correct? Does the Council accept that publication of substantial documents on the 2nd of June materially limit the ability of service users, carers and scrutiny members to assess the proposal properly before deadlines? We've had that issue before. What assessment has been made of the likely effect of closure on unpaid carers' health and well-being, and the potential risk of increased pressure on more costly social services and other healthcare areas? And finally, how does the proposed closure align with the Council's broader commitments around prevention, integrated care and community-based support? Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. And Natalie, perhaps you could respond to those points that we've had so far, including Malcolm's and Ed's.
I will try my very best to remember all questions. If there's any that I miss, I'm happy to have that flagged, and then I'll pass on to Daniel. I think a first part is to look at the demand element, because there's quite a few themes within the questions around that. There is no denying that demand for adult social care is high, and that we've looked at that in various different reports in various different ways as a council. However, demand for day services on the whole is not necessarily really high. And I think there are a number of factors, and it can't be looked at in isolation. And that's because over time, people have preferred different ways of being supported. So I'm going to use one example, and it's not prescriptive to everybody. People like direct payments, they like having personal assistance, accessing different local assets or community resources. I know I've worked in social care for over 20 years. That's more prominent now than once upon a time that where people did access more building-based support. So we've had to take that into consideration, the different ways in which people want to be supported, and the way that we look at that personalised support when we're assessing people's eligible needs. In terms of impact and in terms of outcomes, so we've done an equality impact assessment as part of this, but we will continue to monitor any plans that, should they go forward or be accepted or put in place, as we would with any plan within the transformation programme. I do want to acknowledge the consultation process. We've tried to make it as broad as possible so that it's not just subject to online and people having to complete forms, that we've had one-to-one conversations with people, with their carers, with staff, and with local communities, because we really understand that we know that this service is of value to those that are currently accessing it. But just in terms of demand, I think it's just really important to reflect, not from a service perspective, but from a people perspective, the different ways in which people like to access their community and be supported today. In terms of some of the more minute detail within the business case, I'll hand over to Dan at this point, just around the estimates.
Thank you, Natalie. And Daniel, perhaps you can pick up, if you've got the information, Malcolm's point about trends in usage and the context.
Yeah, that should be okay. So There was some analysis over time of usage of days, etc. I've actually got it to hand here. There are, in terms of numbers of days, so if we measure the numbers of days of usage, and actually it came from asking us to have a look at the data that we came across this. So the average days vary between 8 and 12 days a week of service that is provided over that week, and that hasn't really changed since 2020. So these aren't, although the numbers are particularly low at the moment, they've been relatively similar between 8 and 12 for the last 6 years. So I think it's fair to say that we can see what the utilisation of the service is and has been, and actually there hasn't really been often with these things you see an impact from COVID. There wasn't really an impact from COVID. It was utilised pretty much the same after as it was before. So in terms of usage, it is pretty similar. We are particularly low now, but that's probably because we paused any new people so that we could reduce impact.
And just butt in, which I shouldn't do, apologies. Were those higher numbers previously sufficient to make it a service which covered its costs, or were they still below that level, which is my guess from the figures?
Yeah, so in terms of value for money, in order for this service to run efficiently, it would need to be around 20 people per day. So that would be 20 people accessing the service every single day. And on average, I do actually have that as well. So on average, in 2023, average attendance was around 8. It did actually go up in 2024-25 to almost 13, 12, 13. But we've been nowhere near the estimated 20, or the required 20 to make it efficient.
Thank you very much. So Malcolm, does that cover your query there? And we had two other hands, I think Bernie and Sam, is that right? Great, thank you, Bernie. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. This is a point that applies both to this item and the Aqua Myra item on the agenda. We've talked a lot about the importance of process and that we're here as scrutiny, but I think that can lead to the conversation becoming quite dry. We've got a fairly dry report in front of us, and I absolutely recognise that this is about 5 people who are going to be severely impacted, and their families and the people around them. And, you know, as a councillor, I need to go home and be able to, you know, not think I'm a terrible person, and being comfortable around the process is a key part of that. So, as a council, from having spoken to lots of my fellow councillors, the vast majority are in it because they want to do the best for the people of Shropshire. And when we talk about difficult decisions, for me, that means the ones where we're having to balance up the needs of one group against the needs of another. And here we're looking at a report that's about 5 people. The Aqua Myra one, sort of up to 15 people, very heavily affected by something. But I'm aware if we don't make these difficult decisions, we're actually impacting on a whole load of people who aren't mentioned in the report, because there's a limited pot of money, and we've got to spread that fairly across all the people of Shropshire that we represent. So, bringing this back to what we do as a committee, the importance of being confident in the process for me is that I completely recognise we're making decisions that are about people. And when we talk about process, the reason it's so important is because it's through the process that we can be certain that we're doing the best across everyone in Shropshire. So it's not something that needs an answer, but it was something that I felt was quite important to get across to everyone, that I'm really aware that this is about individual people. And that's why the decision is so difficult. It's not just a thing about budgets or how we allocate money. It's a lot more than that.
Thank you very much, Sam, and I'm sure we all can share those concerns about this being about real people, real members of the public, real people in need of services, and we want to be, as a committee, trying to make sure that we're doing our best to ensure that this decision by Cabinet is properly informed. Natalie, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just to outline, it's really important to us as a council that we take on board people's views, opinions and needs. In Helena Lane, most people that are accessing the service are not local authority funded, they are self-funding their care, but it's really important to us that we have offered Care Act assessments and carers assessments within this, so that from a local authority perspective, we are able to support people in identifying their eligible needs and giving information and advice around other ways of being supported. So that really matters to us. And that is something that is our commitment going forward, that those offers have been made to people that currently attend the service.
Can I just add to that, sorry? So obviously these are very difficult decisions. I appreciate that, and I think I've weighed those things up as well myself. I didn't come into social care to make proposals like this, but I also got responsibility to the taxpayers really of Shropshire to be putting forward decisions that are difficult that we need to make at the moment. And to put this into some perspective, yesterday I thought I'd have a look at how many people actually use day services. So how many people that the council fund for day services across Shropshire for older people, and that number is 37. That's how many people the local authority fund for daycare for older people. Now, proportionately, cost-wise, out of everything that we spend on older people's day services, 2/3 of that goes on 36 of those services. The other third actually is costed at Helena Lane, and that's because it is because over time really the service has changed in the terms of who uses that service. So once upon a time, if that was council funded people, that would be different, and as we moved into a self-funding situation with low utilisation, it's really bumped the difference up, and it's quite stark, and that's where this challenge is really, in terms of equity of funding and meeting need, because the council has a duty to meet need, and we can meet need in different ways. It doesn't have to be through specific service provision. There will always be some level of preference for people, but our duty is to meet people's needs, and we are confident that people's needs can be met, but in a different way.
Dawn.
It is a sound business financial case that you're putting forward, but I just do want to ask you to take forward that there are some concerns over the process, which is what you've asked us to look at today, with timings and information and data. So I think that needs to be tightened up, as there are going to be more difficult decisions that need to be made going forward. So I'd like to see some improvements there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Yes, we must look at that and look at what learning points there may be from this. The recommendation on this report is to note the review and the issues about financial sustainability, and recommend progress in delivering the wider adult social care transformation plan is reviewed by People Overview and Scrutiny in 12 months' time. And so that that review ought obviously, may I just finish? That review ought obviously to be looking at those learning points, if not before. Tan, you wanted to come in.
I do apologise for handing you down the wave like that. Just to kind of go back on process, I think it's really important that Natalie and Dan do just set out the process that has been followed. I don't accept that the process has not been followed.
Right, I'll come to that.
You can.
Okay, so in terms of process, at the beginning of the year, in January, we sought a decision from Cabinet to have a consultation on 2 day services. One of those was Helena Lane. An agreement was granted. Throughout the process of the consultation, we took an update to the People Overview Scrutiny Committee. That was part of our performance report, so it wasn't the main body of the report, but it was an update within that report. This report has come in because we think that it's really, really important to look at the financial sustainability case, as well as the review and the consultation, prior to it going to Cabinet for a full decision on the 10th of June. So that's the process that's been followed to date. There is lots of information within the Cabinet report around the process that was followed for consultation. I can confidently sit here today and say that that's one of the widest consultation processes that I've carried out, because I think particularly within this area, this very sensitive area that we're talking about, the view of peoples and communities needed to feature quite strongly within that.
Thanks very much, Tanya and Natalie. And what we're saying there is that officers have followed the agreed procedures for a consultation of this kind. Should there be other ways of doing things or other learning to be found, then that is back to politicians, isn't it, to be looking at the policy. But personally, I don't see that that there's any particular issue to raise ourselves as Scrutiny with this report and recommendation going forward to Cabinet. Bernie, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Helen Lane is a PFI build, and therefore there are ongoing costs of that build. And I think where services involve PFI builds and contracts, then some of the background information should be brought to the scrutiny committees so that it can be seen in the context of that. And this should, in my view, apply to all PFI buildings.
But Bernie, are you saying that's a query you want answered now?
No.
Regarding Helena Lane? Okay.
Yes, but not answered now. Answered at some point, perhaps by communication to the committee members. But in principle, going forward, for all PFI builds.
Thank you, Bernie, and I'm sure you'll remind us of that if we forget in future. So, Natalie.
Yeah, just in response to that, note the recommendations from the committee. For the purpose of this report, we've been clear to specify that the review has been of the day services. We know that and acknowledge that there's other services that are active within Helena Lane, but just for the purpose of this report, it's for the day service. But we do note the wider recommendation in terms of PFI buildings. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions and the discussion on this. Thank you for the presentation. So I'm summarising, I think, that we as a committee feel there has been appropriate consultation. The case has been fairly made and follows policy as agreed with Cabinet. So I think we're content for this to go forward from Scrutiny to Cabinet for their decision on Wednesday. Am I correct in saying that? Thank you all very much. Thank you to our guests who've been sitting through this and listening, 2 or 3 of you, I think. And I should have thanked Jill for her supplementary paper, which you provided and we sent round the committee for us to look at in advance. Thank you all for bearing with us on this. Okay, so we're now moving on, unless anybody's got any points. We're now moving on to item 10, moving back, as it were, Aquamira. And we have the same Natalie and Daniel here to present the position on Aquamira. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I will cover the salient points that I feel are relevant to this committee. Similarly to the last report, it's just to note the context within the external auditors and Grant Thornton report and value for money assessment, that this is one of those service-wide reviews, but it's also within the context of the wider adult social care transformation programme. The report will hopefully provide the committee with the findings of the review, including its financial sustainability. Aquamira Day Service currently provides a specialist building-based day service in Shrewsbury for adults with profound and multiple learning disabilities and complex needs. The report makes clear that it's a highly valued service, particularly for its calm and sensory-friendly environment, specialist staff support, and for some individuals, access to the hydrotherapy pool. At the same time, the report sets out that the current model carries high running costs. That includes significant building and pool-related expenditure, and that's one of the principal drivers for change. financial position set out in the report is that Aquamira Day Service has budgeted running costs of £405,970, and that's for 2026-27, with forecast non-care related income of £22,240. The report concludes that the current building-based model in this setting is financially challenging to sustain. It's financially challenging to sustain in the context of the Council's financial emergency and best value duty. The report identifies the transfer of the service to Abbotswood. That would mean closure of the Aquamira building as the option that best addresses financial sustainability while retaining a specialist day service offer. It's important that the report recognises that the consultation did show strong opposition, particularly around the loss of the current environment, continuity of support, transport implications and the hydrotherapy pool. You can see that these issues have informed the equality analysis, transition planning and mitigation measures. The committee is therefore not being asked to determine implementation detail, but to scrutinise the report contents, consider the financial sustainability issues and note the mitigation identified to manage local impact. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Comments from committee, please. Bernie, anybody else? Rosemary, Dawn. And I propose that unless there are very specific questions, that we take those three in sequence, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Natalie, for that summary. And clearly, it's a very difficult area to approach. We're talking about people with very substantial needs. But for the sake of clarity, it would be very helpful to know whether all of the reprovision at Abbotswood is statutory or whether any of it is discretionary. And additionally, the savings of £71,000 appear relatively modest compared with closing because of closing a whole facility and moving to an existing facility. And it would be quite useful to know why the amount of savings is at that level, and rather than substantially more as the impartial observer might think.
Rosemary.
Thank you. So just to say that, to comment really, and to say that I'm aware that Natalie and Daniel did a lot of work on this proposal after it came to Cabinet in January, February, I think, and have made a lot of modifications to the proposal as a result of that. I mean, this is exactly the sort of horrible decision that none of us want to be involved in making. It's just not what we want to do. We want to be making things better for people who suffer enough already in life. But I think it's unavoidable. My hope is that the mitigations in the report are sufficient to enable those, for example, who do use the hydrotherapy pool to get provision at RJAH. Alternatively, I know that the provision at Aquamira has been very on-off because there have been lots of technical issues with the pool where it's been closed for extended periods over the last few years. I should just say it's in my division, but I know it serves people from a much wider area. So yes, not a good decision, but it's one I think we have to make.
Thank you, Rosemary. Dawn?
Thank you. Linking to what Bernie brought up over there, can you guarantee that these £71,000 of savings will not actually be eroded by additional transport care or transition costs? What evidence can you provide today that Abbotswood can replicate a suitable specialist sensory environment that's required by this cohort? And I'm not including hydrotherapy. I understand that that is not a statutory requirement. And what clear trigger points will Cabinet use to review service provision if service users' well-being deteriorates as a result of the change? Thank you.
Natalie.
Thank you. I think we recognise the complex needs of individuals that utilise this service. So it's really important for us that before any move takes place that there's an assessment of readiness for the building. So it's our plan to look at these sensory elements of which we know users of Aquamira service find really beneficial. so far assessments of that building. We do have space in which to do that, but we would be classing that as that would be a point in which we would need to complete that work before we start transferring people to minimise impact within that. When we look at any type of service change, it's really important that we capture reviews and assessments for people that use those services. People's needs change all the time, but also in terms of that change of environment. So social work assessments and reviews would need to pick up any of those potential impacts so that we can support people in the best possible way. We've done an equality impact assessment for this service as well, and part of those mitigations is to make sure that there are robust assessments and care planning for all individuals within that move. I'll hand you over to Daniel. You could just touch upon the transport elements
so
of that, please.
In terms of transport, Abbotswood is also in Shrewsbury. It's not far away. There is actually benefits of moving to Abbotswood in terms of transport as well. So the transport remains at Abbotswood, which means actually people might have the opportunity to use that transport during the day, which they wouldn't normally have. So I think the transport is actually a positive. In terms of the sensory needs of people, and at Aquamira there is, we often talk about a hydrotherapy pool, but one of the other main attractions of people going there is actually the multi-sensory room. Now, that came through strongly in the consultation, so we listened to that, and we've started to work out how much it would actually cost to transfer the multi-sensory room, because as Natalie said, there is space. So we've done an initial feasibility assessment of Abbotswood, and there is a large room at the back, so I'll probably tell you quickly. So Abbotswood originally would have supported 30 people, there's currently around 20 people going there. There is a big room at the back that would certainly suitably support eight users each day. There is also a meeting room just beside it, which could quite easily transfer it into a multi-sensory room. So that's the plans at the moment. So in terms of any savings being eroded, these would be potential. There would be some one-off costs, but they're one-off costs compared to annual budget reduction. The annual budget reduction that Bernie mentioned, so at the moment we have to account for the cost of running that building. So at the moment the day service pays around 96,000 per year for that. So the reason it's 71,000 is because we've taken off what the income we forecast we would get, because we privately rent out the pool as well. So that's why it's 71,000. However, the future use of the building isn't really for the day service to determine that. That's got to be through another mechanism of the councils and through the right department. So I don't know what the council will do in the future or decide to do with that building, but from a day service perspective, we have the ability to transfer this service to an existing location with zero extra cost, and that's why we can confidently say it's 71,000, because it's the 96 minus the income.
Sorry, Chair, can we just confirm? So there will be a continuing cost of £96,000 per year for the maintenance of the unused Aquamira area building. Is that correct?
No. Go on. Sorry. So the cost of the building, the council will still own the building. I don't know what the council will decide to do with that building afterwards. So. But from a day service perspective, if we move out, we would be reducing our expenditure on day services by 96,000. The council, I suppose, there's various options the council can consider in terms of the building.
Thank you, Bernie. Duncan?
I'm glad you led me to where I was going to go, because I'm very concerned that we've got a cost of a building being retained here with security, etc., and then the next line that just says future use of the council building be considered separately by property services. We all know that empty buildings cost money. So in terms of us, as not from you as a service, but from us as an overall council, there's a gap here for me that I would really like to see the numbers for. I mean, we're just here to look at scrutiny. I have to say, from a scrutiny point of view, there are figures missing here that we should really have about what property services think the ongoing cost of that building or the future viability of that building is, for us to make a realistic assessment of whether this is the right decision.
Though just to check on that, I mean, are you arguing that the figures that we have in front of us and the case being made are not valid on their own anyway? Yes, there is another question to be asked, but
I think
isn't there a question in parallel?
They're incomplete for us as a committee on behalf of the overall council, rather than just looking at the service.
Rosemary, yes, please.
Very briefly, just to say that on the site there are newly constructed residential properties. So perhaps that might lead us to where it might end up.
Natalie or Daniel, do you want to come in and comment?
Thank you, Chair. I think in other reports today we have discussed some of the significant challenges in adult social care, whether that be demand and cost. This report outlines a way of maintaining that specialist support for people with complex needs, but in a more cost-effective way. So still being able to support and meet need, but doing that in a different way that's not costly. And I think that initially needs to be looked at in isolation because of how serious this is when we make these sorts of decisions for people. So I personally, from a service perspective, I'm really glad that that hasn't been part of a wider assets review. So I can sit here confidently to you today and say that that's been reviewed, very much thinking about people front and centre and being able to present a case where we can move people, but providing that specialist and sensory provision. There may be, as you will see in other reports, asset-wide reviews, but this definitely is a way of meeting need in a more cost-effective way, which I think, in terms of value for money and meeting need, is a really important point.
Thank you very much. Can I just take two obvious points from that? One is that with future reports like this, perhaps we would be looking for something more explicit about the future of the property in this kind of situation. And the second point is that we can flag this to the relevant cabinet member, Ruth Houghton, as part of her considerations in her decision on Wednesday. Does that help address the point that you're concerned about, Duncan?
It helps. I'll just say one word, Shirehole. Yeah, we know there's a cost to empty buildings, so I get very nervous if we're agreeing to a decision that is council-wide that doesn't go across council and only looks at one sector.
Thank you. Can we take that as Daniel?
Sorry, I also missed the point around, somebody asked around statutory provision and discretionary powers, etc. So I just want to be clear that the local authority doesn't have a duty to provide hydrotherapy. That would be a health need to meet, which I think is really important when we're thinking about how we meet people's needs. So
I think we've got that, and that was clear in the report, wasn't it too? Thanks very much. I think we need to move on, if we may.
Chair, I wasn't just referring to hydrotherapy.
In terms of
statutory versus discretionary.
So
much as we want to provide this, just a recognition of what it is.
Okay. I think what we're looking at is a discretionary service, aren't we, in this case, and that recommendation is being made to Cabinet, and I think we're in general agreeing that recommendation can go forward. Thank you all very much. And thank you for staying with us, and sorry we've kept you so long to get onto these couple of very important items at the end. As others have said, it's of great concern that we're in a position where we have to review some of our important provision for those who need it most. But it is a very difficult financial situation for the council, and we are at risk, as I said right at the beginning, of being obliged to cut all discretionary services and to being run by commissioners, and you may think we're being forced to make difficult decisions, but then of course things would very likely get even worse. So I think that's where we're at. I know a number of colleagues have got to go. We haven't got onto work programme yet, but
I think that'll be mainly addressed tomorrow in the session.
I'd like to address it now.
Yes, of course, yes. No, of course. Of course.
With respect.
Of course.
It's just briefly to say, we talked, didn't we, earlier about possibly having a meeting in July. I think it feels as though we need to be doing that if we can, and to be picking up some of the issues from today. Tom the other day talked to me about possible briefings which could be moved forward on, and that I think is the critical point quickly to mention now. And Tom, you mentioned, didn't you, something around assets, something about the improvement board, which is the point I forgot to make earlier, and I think something about MTFP. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't want to keep you all now, but do all those seem relevant, important issues for us to be picking up as briefings? The idea then would be to have a short briefing from officers concerned, which we could then look at ourselves, debate at a future meeting, and circulate more widely around members of the council. And my final point on that is, yes, we don't have a detailed brief for those briefings, but my suggestion would be that, as Tom has those partly in mind already, that Tom and I finalise those and share those around the committee. Tom, your chance.
Just checking to make sure it's going to come on, having seen Ed's experience with it earlier. Absolutely. So Claire mentioned tomorrow we're doing that strategic work programming session here for scrutiny members across all the committees. I think the briefings, as the committee's already alluded to, are a good way to develop that learning, that understanding of the topic without using the value time that is the committee meeting time. So I think that more will come from tomorrow. We've got the chance to scope it and work it forward, but we've also got a note of the sort of the observation earlier about when you're doing big complex pieces, how do you build those in and give the committee the chance to understand what's there and what's happening. So absolutely. Briefings will be, I think, a key part of helping develop understanding across all members, but also committees.
And members suggest, thank you very much, Natalie and Daniel. Sorry, thank you. So just the last point before we wind up is, I'll let Bernie come in a second, is that those three areas to us do seem important areas to be looking at going forward. MTFP coming up in July, assets strategy. I think there's also an assets paper around, and we've picked up on that just now with Duncan's point, and the improvement board, and looking at that. And personally, I have to say, I have seen a lot of different panels, groups, boards being mentioned, and I'm not quite sure how they all fit. I'm sure they're all very valuable. I'm not quite sure how they all fit together. So from my point of view, I'm quite interested in seeing something a bit more about the architecture of the kind of transformation, governance and oversight process, though indeed that might be a governance question, I guess. Bernie, you wanted to say something, otherwise shall we call it a day?
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly. Firstly, two of the papers were late coming to this committee, and I wonder if we should establish a time period for after which the items will not be discussed, because there's insufficient time for members to consider them. And this is being, I think, applied generally across the committees in the council. And I was going to try to come in earlier, but just to ask what suggestions you had for the next meeting, because if we're going to stay with Mondays and we're going to have it in July, then it's going to be either probably the 20th or the 13th. And I wondered if we could maybe suggest one of those options, so that we don't have the situation where most members can't make one or the other.
Thank you, Bernie. Ed?
No, I do appreciate Chair giving me the opportunity to speak. Very, very quickly, I think what I'd like to see on the minutes as well, going forward, is what questions have been taken forward to Cabinet, if any. Sometimes it might not be necessary, but also what the responses were as well for us, so we can see what the how our scrutiny questions are being addressed.
Thank you. Well, before we all go, I must say that as far as I'm aware, I haven't been asked to take any specific questions forward, except perhaps for Duncan's final point about the concern about assets in the particular case of Aquamira.
Can I just also Can I just also, because it came up in Constitution Working Group, answer Bernie's point, because there is now a policy on late papers.
Okay.
Which says that if committee service is not received a specific report by the time the agenda is to be published, generally 5 p.m, 5 clear working days before the meeting schedule takes place, the report is authorised either out of contact or has not been able to contact the chair to obtain the necessary consent and not report to follow. The item will be removed from the agenda on the basis that having introduced these arrangements, the deadlines need to be respected. That is now policy.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Permission was sought in this case for these two papers. In line of that.
It was, but it's very useful to know that. Thank you, Duncan. And of course, we've ended up with a rather rushed and busy meeting because we had those two papers added to our agenda fairly late. Were they in the forward plan and so on? And if so, why didn't we see that coming? Anyway, that's another question. I think we kind of run out of time. Shall we kind of close the meeting? And those that want to...
Mine's not this, it's just a general question.
Okay.
We're still live, so...
Shall we, let's close the meeting. Thank you very much to all of those watching us online. And if a few of us want to continue discussing a few points, let's do that. But thank you all very much for giving me a fairly relaxed first meeting. Thank you.